The prospect coverage continues here on Locked On Blue Jackets, as today we are talking all about David Reinbacher with Sebastian High of Dobber Prospects.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you the good, bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. A little bit of a change of plan today. We were supposed to be talking about Igor Chinakhov, but change in schedules for Hayden meant that instead we're going to roll another prospect profile that I recorded a little bit earlier this week with Sebastian High of Dobber Prospects. So today we're going to be talking all about David Reinbacher. Is he the best defenseman in the draft? Should he be going top 10? And we'll talk a little bit about who the Blue Jackets could take at 22nd overall. So before we get started, I want to just thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube and also on Sirius XM. So if you are a radio app person, you can find us over there. But I'm going to turn it over to past me and Sebastian as well, because he is much smarter than I am. So I think defense is one of the positions that the Blue Jackets are pretty set on, but there are a couple of names out there that people keep talking about, and so I thought let's take another look at one of the defensemen that are going to be that's going to be going in the first round, probably. So I've got Sebastian High here from Dobber Prospect to talk a little bit about David Reinbacher, because he is a name that I am hearing more and more about. Usually I'm hearing it in the context of complaining from my friends over at Locked On Canadians who don't want him to go 5th overall. But let's start off with an easy one. When David Reinbacher steps on the ice, what kind of player are we getting?
David Reinbacher is a very, very good skater. He is a very strong defensive presence, and whichever team adds him is getting a high likelihood second pairing defenseman, which is a very valued commodity in the National Hockey League. And I can understand the frustration, especially, in the context of the Montreal Canadiens and 5th overall. David Reinbacher is a tremendous prospect, but it is a question of who you'd be passing on to select him. And if you're passing on a player like Matvei Michkov, or I like Zach Benson and Oliver Moore a ton, it kind of makes it a bit more complicated as a draft pick in that slot. But I think that, at least in terms of prospect evaluation, we should try to separate those rumors and that frustration of draft slot from the player themselves, because David Reinbacher is a great prospect. And I currently have him ranked at, 17th overall on my board. And this is a strong draft class. So this is a player I like a ton. He is, again, as I said, a very strong skater. When he steps on the ice, you get a player with strong passing ability with the puck. Defensively, he makes excellent micro adjustments to get his stick in lanes, to make it difficult for players to get to the slot. He is very, very concentrated on protecting the slot first and foremost in his own zone. And that is an excellent habit for a defenseman to have. And my player comparable for Reinbacher at this stage is, ironically for Habs fans, Caden Gooley. This is a similarity in terms of the mobility and the powerful skating. I would substitute like Reinbacher is a far stronger passer than Gooley was at the same stage in his career, but Gooley's also more violent. And when he goes and stops someone in transition, Gooley will throw the big hit. He doesn't chase them, but he will throw them. David Reinbacher is more of a suffocating transition defender, where he tries to stop play by just forcing them into the boards rather than lighting them up with a massive hit, which is in many cases equally effective. It's just a different style of transition defending. And at the same time, both have really interesting toolkits. Like Reinbacher is a really strong passer, but his handling mechanics are quite flawed. He has a very locked top hand, and he kind of has his elbow above his shoulder on his top hand, which really limits his range of motion as a handler, which means that he's not overly deceptive, but he can use his reach to get around players and to kind of play keep away. But that kind of limits him as a puck carrier in transition. He's far stronger as a passer. And with Gooley, you see a similar limitation in terms of, I guess, panicking under pressure in possession, where instead of drawing it in and exploiting pressure and to create openings, he kind of just flicks the puck into open ice to get out of that situation. And I think for both players, that kind of limits their offensive potential. So I don't think either is going to be a future top power play quarterback. I think both could maybe be decent enough on the second power play unit as a distributor rather than a creator. But yeah, Reinbacher's awesome, and I really enjoy watching him. He's put up decent numbers in the Swiss Pro League, which is not a development league. But in my view, much of that production is coming off of secondary assists and rebounds up from shots from the point. And I wouldn't say he's the most projectable offensive talent, but that's not what you're drafting him for. You're drafting him to be a really strong defender. At the same time, I think he's a lot closer to a Caden Gooley in terms of level than a Moritz Seider, which is a comparable I'm seeing a lot. And I see a guy like Dmitry Simashev to be a lot more similar to Seider than Reinbacher is. But Reinbacher's without a doubt going top 15. He's probably going to go top 10. He might go top 5. And he is the most pro-ready defenseman in this draft class, and that has value. And I have my reservations on the upside, which is why I personally wouldn't make that pick. But I can understand how teams would rationalize it. I have a tough time picking a guy like Reinbacher if a guy like Matvei Michkov is still available, because the talent on that kid is really impressive. But yeah, Reinbacher's awesome, and I do really enjoy watching him play.
Yeah, I feel like, and maybe this is kind of just because I'm tuned into it, but I feel like this year there has been a lot of, not necessarily controversy, but I feel like the defensemen have been really divisive. Like there are a lot of people who really like Reinbacher and really don't like him. And kind of, again, with Simashev, and I've kind of seen it a little bit with Axel Sandin Pellikka as well.
For sure.
There are a lot of people who really like Sandin Pellikka, and there are a lot of people that are like, no, he's not going to turn into anything. And I can't decide if that's, again, just because I'm paying attention to it, or if it is actually a thing. But I feel like defensemen do really kind of, people get really riled up about defensive prospects, and it's really interesting to watch as someone who only really knows enough about prospects stuff to make them dangerous. You know, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a prospect expert, but I have kind of been getting into it a little bit more over the past couple of years, and so kind of the Blue Jackets I don't think are in danger of picking a guy like Reinbacher. I did, like, if you take him at third,
top 12 picks on defensemen last year, I'd be surprised if it were defensemen being picked again this year.
In a minute, we have got more of my conversation with Sebastian about David Reinbacher. But first, I want to tell you about eBay Motors, because for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head on over to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage, look for the green check to know the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. It's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Yeah, well, the Blue Jackets have the Blue Jackets of their fifth. Well, I'm going to try that again. Of their last 5 first-round picks, 3 of those have been defensemen.
Yeah.
So I think David Reinbacher doesn't necessarily fit into the Blue Jackets' plans, but it's still kind of fun to look at where he might fall and kind of what his strengths and weaknesses are. And so you talked a little bit about kind of he's the most pro-ready defenseman. What do you think is kind of his biggest limitation there? Like, do you think he's ready to step into the NHL in October, or is he probably going to go back to Switzerland for a season or go over to the CHL potentially?
I think pro readiness is a really subjective thing. I think of all the defensemen in this draft class, he is the one that could go to the NHL next season and not do horribly. I don't necessarily think that'd be the best thing for his development, because if I were to draft Reinbacher, what I'd be focusing on would be, yes, I want to continue to refine his strengths, like his defensive game. Keep working on that, because that is a defining strength at this point. And you want to keep that way. However, I would really try to work on his handling mechanics and try to work on some deception and try to unlock that offensive game, because he has the passing ability to kind of maybe become a playmaker in the future. He just lacks the playmaking habits and the other tools that make a playmaker, because it's not just passing ability. You have to be deceptive and be able to draw in pressure and hit small passing lanes and find those passing lanes in the first place and maybe even create them. So there's a lot of different factors in that projection, but that would be my focus. I wouldn't try to make him into like a defenseman, a goal scorer. Those aren't exactly a big thing in the NHL at this stage anymore. But I think trying to unlock that playmaking and deception would be really great. So yeah, that would probably be one of the things I would focus on in his development. But as for the pro readiness, I think he could do fine in like with 15 minutes a night next year in a sheltered role with a strong partner. But I think maybe for his development, I'd give him another year in Switzerland or two.
Yeah, and I guess that all kind of really depends on where he ends up going in the draft. You know, if he does go at 5, then I think
there's more pressure. Yeah,
there's more pressure for them to make him into an NHL ready guy. Not necessarily immediately, but I think there's a lot more pressure than if he goes, you know, like, what was it? You have him 17th?
I have him 17th.
On yours,
yeah.
I believe. So
yeah.
it's interesting to kind of look at how that'll shape, because I think about Cole Sillinger in that example, and like if Cole Sillinger goes any higher than or any lower than 12th overall, is he in the NHL as an 18-year-old? I don't think so. You know, so it maybe David Reinbacher will surprise people. Maybe he'll show up to whichever training camp he gets drafted at and keep giving them excuses to keep him around. So it'll be interesting to see. I want to kind of go back a little bit to the rest of the defensemen in the draft, because like I said, a lot of people are saying that David Reinbacher is the best prospect.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily know if I think that. I am really high on Sandy Pellica. I think he's going to be a real fun defenseman in this league. But kind of where would you put Reinbacher in terms of other defensive prospects that are probably going to be first round guys?
I currently have Reinbacher as my third top defenseman in the draft class. I have Dmitry Simashev at 8th overall. He's a player that I adore. It is riskier. Dmitry Simashev is he's fun, because to me, like, when I watch Simashev, I see what many people write about David Reinbacher. I see a player with tremendous defensive ability. I think it's even better than Reinbacher's. I think like he closes his gaps viciously. He shuts down space so effectively. He protects the slot even better than Reinbacher, which is saying something. And on top of that, he shows flashes of offensive dynamism that I have not seen from Reinbacher, where he will draw in that pressure and then hit a cross crease pass to a teammate that usually did not score on those chances. And these are flashes. They were not consistent. So there definitely is, I guess, some questions there, just because a lot of it with Simashev is projection, and by ranking him at 8th overall above names like Ryan Leonard, for instance, which is risky, and I've thought long and hard about that, just because Ryan Leonard is amazing and awesome and a slam dunk NHLer, and Simashev is a lot more raw. At the same time, I do think his defensive game is very refined. So I think that also helps, I guess, give him that higher floor, because at the very least, you're getting a tremendous defensive piece, and then possibly it could be even more. And I like him a ton. And then, as you said, Sandy Pellica is tremendously fun, pure offensive talent, reminds me a lot of Lane Hutson in some ways. And as someone who ranked Lane Hutson 11th overall last year, and he's making me look smart, which I'm very appreciative of. That's a compliment that I don't make lightly. And he's the best goal scorer among defensemen in the draft class by a wide margin. I think this is a player who could be a 15-goal guy in the NHL in the right situation. And as a defenseman, that is pretty cool. But yeah, he's awesome. Defensively, he's a lot more raw. There are some flashes of good defensive habits, but as a whole, it's a work in progress rather than a refined thing. But yeah, those are both players that I see a lot more upside in than with David Reinbacher, who I think caps out as a number 3 defenseman. And those are the two players that I see a lot more top pairing potential in among defensemen in the draft class.
Tomorrow on Locked On Blue Jackets, we are going to be talking about Igor Chidakov, how his season was, and whether he could be a part of the Blue Jackets core in the future. But right now, we've got a little bit more conversation about David Reinbacher and also about who the Blue Jackets could take at 22nd overall. Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I don't know that he's available at 22nd. I would be surprised if Reinbacher's there at 22. He might be. Even if he is, there's no guarantee that the Blue Jackets will take him. But let's kind of wrap up this little profile with a little bit of talk about that 22nd overall pick, because I have a couple of guys that I'm kind of eyeing there. The Locked On Podcast Network is doing a NHL mock draft at the minute, and I am waiting for my chance to draft one of my guys at 22nd. But who do you have currently at 22nd overall, and how likely do you think it is that he would be a fit for the Blue Jackets?
I don't think the guy I have ranked 22nd overall is going to be available there. It's Colby Barlow, who I think is going to go top 15. The thing with Barlow that's funny is, as he's currently constructed, he's probably an NHL player. Like, he could be an NHL player next year without too much issue. The funny thing is, it's all a question of how much more can he improve. And that, I think, is a question they don't usually ask yourself with 18-year-olds of like,
I mean, the thing about
how
Colby
long
Barlow
is
is
the
I think
runway
he's
here?
actually 26 and is
Oh,
just
yeah,
pretending.
exactly. but yeah, so Barlow is a power forward, I guess, and a great shot, like a ridiculously good shot, like probably top 5 in the draft class. It is super powerful. He's also a volume shooter. He will shoot pretty much whenever he has the puck within range of the goal. And in transition, he's super linear, so he'll only go in a straight line. He's purely north-south, and that limits his dynamism. And he's also not perhaps the best playmaker in the draft class. He's quite one-dimensional. I also wouldn't say that he's overly great defensively. At the same time, he has a ridiculous shot, and he has some good goal-scoring habits, despite being a ridiculous volume shooter, to the point of, like, I've scouted games where he's had like 14 shots on goal, like on his own, which is not, it's either a sign of like, you are way too good for your league, or you shoot whenever you even have the puck in the offensive zone. It was the latter in that situation. But he's not going to be available. I'd be shocked if he were available at 22. But maybe a name that I would quite like for the Jackets, which I think would also be along the lines of what your team has drafted in the past, would be a player called Otto Stenberg. I have him ranked 15th overall. I think he'll be available around 22nd. Not a guarantee, but I think it's more likely than not. And I mean, you put a guy like Stenberg next to Kent Johnson, and you just tell him, learn what you can from this guy. Stenberg is less chaotic than Johnson and doesn't have the same like elite tier Zegras type skill. But he's a really strong handler. He has great tools. He's an amazing skater, super dynamic. His brightest flashes are blinding. And at the U18s, he was one of the best players, and that kind of cemented his spot at 15th overall for me. I'd had him there for months, but at the tournament, I was like, yeah, I'm sticking with it. He's going to be my 15th overall guy, and I don't really see him moving from there. And I'm a big fan of Otto Stenberg. So he'd be a name that I think would be pretty interesting in that slot. And I think it would also make sense considering what the Blue Jackets have drafted in the past.
Yeah, he's one of the guys that I'm keeping an eye on. If he's available at 22nd, I'm definitely giving a long, hard look at that guy. We actually just did his prospect profile for Locked On Blue Jackets, I think a couple of weeks ago, with Patrick Bexell of Habs Eyes on the Prize. We love to get Patrick on to talk about the Swedish guys. And Stenberg is a guy that I hadn't heard a lot about, and the more I hear about him, the more I'm like, yeah, no, he could be.
He's fun.
He could be a lot of fun. And
High
honestly, at
too.
this point, that's all I ask for in my draft picks is I would like for them to be fun, good at hockey, but also fun, you know. And that's all I've got for you today. Like I said, tomorrow we are going to be talking about Igor Chinikov and his season as a whole, whether he can make it back from the Monsters, whether he can be a part of the Blue Jackets core in the future. So that's tomorrow's episode. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JKOBFORSTER. You can find Hayden at HaydenH971 on Twitter. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets for comments, questions, criticisms. You can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. We are doing a mailbag at some point this week, mostly about Mike Babcock, but if you have any other burning questions, then you can send those in. You can comment on this YouTube video. You can at us on Twitter. You can email us. Just however you want to get the questions to us is fine. So get your questions in, and thank you once again for listening, for making this your first listen today, every day. Locked On Blue Jackets are free and available on all podcast platforms and also over on YouTube. So if you haven't hit subscribe yet, we hit our next milestone, which is very exciting. So we're moving on to the next one. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.